Welcome to this second teachers webinar on strategy dynamics given on the 9th of January. This particular webinar in the series is concentrating on the issue of business examples and cases that can be used in classes to teach strategy dynamics. And the webinar was given for people wishing to teach strategy dynamics, whether they are starting with knowledge of strategy or if they are coming from a system dynamics background. As it happened, the audience we got for the webinar included quite a lot of people out in the practitioner community as well, with an interest in communicating strategy dynamics to their colleagues, either clients that they work for if they're consultants or people in their own organisations if they were working for companies. If you want to see what this course is all about, then go to strategydynamics.com and navigate to the online course, where there is a large amount of information and videos explaining the method and how it relates to standard strategy frameworks. And if you are a teacher, then there is free registration and free use for almost all of the material that we provide on that course. Okay, so this is the second of the 3 webinars we're doing this week about teaching strategy dynamics. And the first thing to say is that I know we've got some people here who are not so much teachers as practitioners who I hope we'll still be able to provide something useful and relevant for them. And in the second webinar, what we're going to talk about are the kinds of examples that you can use to illustrate strategy dynamics principles and how the method actually works. And I'll pick up quite a lot of those examples from our online course, but also talk about the principles by which you can choose examples and cases really of your own. You don't have to follow those that I've done. So, as I say, just a quick repeat of some of these basic issues from the start. As I say, we've got a very diverse group taking part in these webinars. I know we've got teachers, but we've also got consultants, executives. I can't tell for sure whether we've actually got any students on today. We've got people from business backgrounds and non-business backgrounds. We've got people who understand about strategy but not system dynamics, and people who understand about systems thinking but not strategy. So if you find a bit of the conversation getting a little bit obvious for you, please be patient with the other people in the audience. Just a reminder of what we're trying to do with all this. My professional life was transformed by coming across system dynamics quite a few years ago now, and the ability to do things better in business and strategy situations is absolutely huge, but the penetration is really very low. So we want an order of magnitude faster growth in how people out in the real world actually understand this stuff, and communicating through teachers is an extremely important mechanism for us to achieve that. I don't mind how you do it. You don't have to use my stuff. Use whatever you like. But if there are teachers in this audience today, and I'm sure there are, you fulfil a very, very important purpose in getting a lot of people out in the big wide world who could and should be using dynamics for their management decision making and policy setting to do so. What are we selling? Well, as I say, we're selling a much, much better way to do strategy and management, a much better way to explain system dynamics, whether we mean just the systems idea or whether we really focus on the dynamics issues. Pretty much all, or at least most of the material that we refer to in the course and the course itself is free to academics at a recognised teaching institution and people who register with us, and an awful lot of the material is free or low cost to pretty much everybody. I should add that I can't explain this stuff without showing it on real working models, and to do that we use our own platform designed specifically for this purpose called SysDea. and if please forgive me if that's what I use. But it's very easy if you're happy with other software, Insight Maker or Bensim or iThink or whatever it may be, to copy or replicate the way in which I've done this stuff in your own choice of software. By the way, as we go, do feel free to add chat comments as we go. It's that second little bubble on the join me bar at the top, and I'll try to both keep talking and also keep an eye on comments and questions as we go. 1 second here. So what we're going to try to cover today is this list. This is not an agenda in the sense that we're going to go through item 1, then item 2, then item 3. I'm going to go through item 1 first, but then the other 4 items on the list will really kind of cover repeatedly as we go through the examples that I talk about. So the place to start is with recognizing that strategy and strategic management is a very, very broad topic indeed, and it's not just about writing a business plan or a strategic plan for a business. There are lots of other strategy questions as well, so it's helpful first of all to get a way of categorizing what these questions are. So let me start with that. We'll end, of course, with some opportunity for you to pose some questions and comments. We started in webinar 1 talking about the fundamentals of what the answers are that Strategy Dynamics offers, and we talked about this chart, which kind of lays out the 3 key questions. Why has the performance of the situation got to where we are today? Where might that performance go if things don't go so well? How might we get the performance to go much better following the green line out into the future? We made the point that this can include non-financial aims as well as financial aims, and we mentioned that this applies for a whole organisation or just for a part of the organisation, say a country business unit or a function, maybe marketing or HR or whatever. So let's just organise that last little piece there, and there are kind of 2 broad purposes of kind of doing strategy, and there are 2 levels at which that might be done. The 2 purposes are, first of all, you may want to put together an overall plan, and that's a plan that continues from year to year, from quarter to quarter, from month to month, and you constantly update it. And for those of you who kind of come from a system dynamics modeling point of view, you may have heard the phrase model the problem, not the system. Well, I think that instruction is quite often misunderstood and misused, in the sense that people think you shouldn't attempt to put together a model of a system so that it can be used for continuing management of that system over time. Well, I think that's wrong if that's the way it's been interpreted. Much of the work I do and what I try to teach people with this approach is precisely how to do that. The system you're working with does have a structure to it, and that structure lives on. It's the data and the behavior of that system that will, of course, change from time to time. And I think there's a big opportunity to go to management and say, look, we can put together a planning framework for this business, for this department, for this business unit, which we can live with, and we can keep on putting in the new data of the situation and updating it and figuring out what we can about how that thing is behaving. So you end up with a living business plan tool. So it could be a strategic plan for a whole company. A very common use of this, I've had quite a few people ask me about this recently, is that you can use the approach to put together the strategy for a new enterprise. There's a big interest in the business school world in entrepreneurship, Huge numbers of students are taking courses in that. And the problem you have with a new enterprise is, well, how will this thing actually work, and will it actually generate the growth in sales and profits that I hope it will? So if you can put together an overall plan looking forward for that new enterprise, it's a very powerful thing that you can take to a bank if you're a small business after a business loan, or you can take to venture capital providers to get you going. So those are just two examples of putting together an overall plan for an organisation. The second category of purpose, though, is to deal with a specific issue at a point in time. When I was practicing as a strategy person in the real world, things would happen and you would want to deal with those things at the time they arise. And a common one for me, and actually one of my favourite ones, because it's such fun, is how to defeat a competitor. Some competitor comes along and thinks they can take a piece of your market off you. Well, there are ways of using models of the situation to figure out exactly where to act to beat a competitor off like that. Or you may be the attacker. You want to take some market position from a much bigger company who appears to have some advantage over you. Well, you can, by understanding the structure and behaviour of the system, figure out a way of taking that competitor on and beating them. Another kind of issue, merging with another company. Mergers so often go wrong. Companies get together with the best of intent, or there's a hostile takeover, whichever of those cases it is. Things don't go the way you expected it to. Customers, for example, may not want to be supplied by your company the way they were happy to be supplied by the company you've taken over. The people who work for the company you take over may not want to carry on working for you, or they may not like the people they've now got to get on with. So mergers can go wrong, and planning the dynamics of what will happen after the merger actually is triggered is another example of a specific issue. A rather hot one right at the moment, of course, is, or has been for 3 to 4 years, is how to respond to a recession, and many companies are still struggling with that. I would say it would have been a good idea if they'd had a model of what a recession might do to them before that recession actually happened, so that they had a plan ahead of time for dealing with that. So those are the two different purposes, but both of those purposes are at the level of the whole organisation. If I just go on now and look at the team, function or department level, well, you might want an overall plan for the marketing of an organisation, or you might want an overall human resources strategy, or you might want an IT strategy. All three of those examples, and others as well, would be examples of plans and strategies that live and get updated continually all the time as each quarter or each year goes by. But again, you can have specific issues within a function or a department as well. So maybe you've got to fix poor service quality, or maybe a particular team faces a challenge where the team's skills have got to be transformed from some old things that they knew how to do to some new things. Or a company might be wanting to cut new product lead times. So what I'll do in the next few minutes is just give you some examples in each of those four quadrants. Two of them we talked about on Monday, so I'll be quite brief about those, but I'll go into a bit more detail on a couple of the others. So if you were with us on Monday, you'll remember I talked about the situation facing Europe's Ryanair airline and the way it dealt with the recession in 2009 and how it's bounced back in terms of growing its profits out to 2012, and the two alternative futures that the company faces. It would like a future plan that will allow it to expand its route networks, get more aircraft, continue growing passenger volumes at good fares and growing profits, and it would rather avoid a future in which growth opportunities dry up, that there are difficult competitive or market conditions, and it has to cut fares and lose profits. So as I explained on Monday, that's the two alternative futures for this business. And this is a very clear example of an overall plan for the whole organisation. This plan has to encompass: what are we going to do about growing the staff? What are we going to do about winning customers? What are we going to do about increasing capacity, maintaining service quality? It's the whole thing. So, as I say, an overall plan for a whole organisation. This particular example is built up really all the way through, certainly the early parts of the online course. So you end up pretty much with a working model of the whole business that pretty much plays out the dynamics of that profit chart that you're seeing there on the screen. Secondly, we looked at the example on Monday of a crisis for a computer support provider, and this is an example of an issue facing a whole organisation. This is not a continuing plan, this is an issue. And the situation came about really because of the organisation's own activity. It brought this on itself by taking on a business development executive, signing up lots of new clients. The support staff got overloaded, quality of support staff suffered, and as a result of that, clients left. And we often have intangibles to deal with. And one of the intangibles here is that the reputation of this company kind of word got around in its local region about it not doing such a good job, which meant that that business development executive found it harder to win more clients after that. So not only were they not winning clients not only were they losing clients, they were finding it more and more difficult to replace them with others. And it was all made worse because staff turnover increased. So the issue here is that we face a risk over the next few months. We're not talking here about 5 or 10 years, not these kind of grand strategic timescales that people think strategy is all about. We're talking about just a few months here, with further staff losses, still worse service, even more client losses as a result of all that. And we need an answer pretty fast. And the answer is, how on earth are we going to turn this around? So there's an example of an issue facing a whole organisation. This is one we haven't talked about before, but it's an example of an overall plan for a department or function. And this is a staffing strategy issue for a law firm I did some work with a few years back. And the way this happens for law firms is that they hire trainees pretty much all the time, but there's obviously a peak when lawyers graduate from law school, and it happens to occur in around the third quarter of each year. So the red line here is the likely ability of this firm to hire lawyers and grow its its staff group over that period of time, and the green is what we would like to have happen. Now, this might seem like quite a long view out into the future, but of course we already know how many lawyers are going to graduate in 4 years' time because they've just started on their law degrees. So it's not as speculative as it might seem. And those two lines, the aim we have here is to hire more trainees than we have historically, to feed that core pool of lawyers so that we can take market opportunities that are out there. But this is a problem, this is a plan rather, that the staffing partner, the person responsible for the staffing in this law firm, needs. And this needs to be a living plan because they will keep hiring and losing people year after year. The challenge is that they know that there are not enough students starting courses. So if they get their normal success rate in hiring the people they try to hire, and they get their normal turnover rate amongst those lawyers, they will end up with fewer lawyers than they need. So they've got to do something about that, but in doing that, they've got to balance the need for growth with the need for experience. If you hire lots and lots of trainees in order to account for the high turnover that you think might happen, then yeah, you've got enough bodies in the building, but they haven't got enough experience to be able to do the level of work that's required. That issue of experience, by the way, is a core topic in part 2 of the course. It's called an attribute of the staff. So we want to win staff, but we also want to grow this attribute of their experience. So that was an example of an overall plan for a specific department or function. This is a long-lived plan for the staffing department in this law firm. An example of a specific issue for a department or a function. This one, again, is a case that a former senior executive student of mine worked on some years back, which is one of these competitive attacks. The company is GlaxoSmithKline. It's one of the world's largest pharmaceutical suppliers, and it has a division that deals with vaccines. And specifically in this case, it's travel vaccines. These are the vaccines that you get when you're going to places where you may catch something really nasty like yellow fever or something. So you get vaccinated before you go. And this is a marketing and sales challenge because up until now, GSK has had the only approved vaccine for one of these particular serious illnesses. Now that basically means that any doctors who want to provide their patients with this vaccine have got no choice but to use the GSK product. But what's happened is that its main competitors just won approval. This is regulatory approval, that's medical safety stuff, for their own version of a vaccine for the same illness. Now, this really is a terribly cutthroat industry. These companies really are at their throats, each other's throats all the time, and the competitor has a sales force who would normally be promoting quite a range of products, but because this is such a big opportunity, they're going to put their sales force onto really pushing this one product, and they've got enough salespeople that they can reach all of GSK's doctors in 10 weeks. And with the likely success rate, what's going to happen to the company's sales volume is it's going to follow the red line on the chart to the right. So we're just going to lose doctors and we're going to lose sales. So the challenge here is how to slow and stop the loss of doctors and sustain sales. So as I say, that's an example of a specific issue facing a department and a function. And look what the timescale is here. This is 10 weeks. This is not 10 years. It's not even 10 months. It's 10 weeks. And if you lose this battle, you suffer really, really badly, because this product generates a large fraction of the cash flow for this part of the business. And my friend who took this job, heading this business unit, faced a real challenge to make sure that at worst it followed the green line on this chart and not the red line. And just to kind of fill in the story, what we did was put together a very simple model in the few weeks just before the start of this event. The company knew that its competitor was going to launch this product, and the model basically told them where to focus their effort and what kinds of messages to put out in their marketing and sales, and how to defeat the competitor. And GSK was pleased to discover that they did indeed defeat the competitor and fought them off. So that's the fourth quadrant of that mix of the different purposes that strategy fulfills and the different levels at which strategy can be thought of for the whole organisation, or just for a department or a function or a business unit. So it's a good idea, I think, to think about, if you're using any particular examples in classes you want to give, what is it an example of? Are you offering an example of a whole organisation business plan, or are you offering an example that's a specific issue of a particular department or function? These are all useful and important things for you to do. So those are the different categories. Those are some examples of the kinds of things that fall in those categories. So let me go on to the other topics now, in terms of the examples that you might use in a course whether you're teaching strategy and want to start introducing some dynamics, or whether you're teaching system dynamics and want to start introducing some strategy. It doesn't matter which side of this issue you're attacking the problem from. You still, I think, should consider some of the following issues. Before we leave this side, let me just point out that that bottom row of examples there means that we're not strictly limiting ourselves to talking about things with capital S strategy. We're covering all kinds of management issues in all kinds of circumstances. So some criteria I use for choosing examples in courses, or if I'm going to do a class for a company training program, for example. These are the kinds of criteria that I just go through a little checklist in my mind. The first one is, and there's some tension here in this, it is important that the examples you use are easy to understand. I had a case, one of the publishers came to me and to talk about a business game that they were interested in developing to support another book that they were publishing, and they explained to me that they'd had some difficulty with an existing business game that they'd had written, which was about an advertising agency's strategy. Now, an advertising agency is not actually that easy a business to understand. Very few of us have got personal experience of what an advertising agency is, and certainly if you're teaching undergraduates, they won't have a clue, and no particular reason why they should. So it's important to find examples that are easy to understand, and ideally a familiar business setting. So the examples that I use, particularly in undergraduate settings, are things like restaurants and airlines, because everyone, even kind of mid-teenagers, the average 15-year-old has got a pretty good idea of what happens in a restaurant. They've got a pretty good idea of what it's like to fly on an airline and what has to happen for them to get that flight. So as I say, pick a familiar business. The tension in this is that if you've got a reasonably sophisticated audience, that can seem sometimes a little bit trivial. So that's a balance that you have to tread quite carefully. With senior executive audiences, for example, they sometimes get a bit irritated that we're using simple business models of airlines and restaurants. So we need to introduce something a little bit more complex. But as I say, it is important, even if it's with experienced audiences, that the examples you use are easy enough to understand. The next issue is that we need to show that what we do is relevant to a very wide range of different contexts. It's no good offering models of one retailer and then another retailer and then an airline and then another airline. We need to show that strategy dynamics or system dynamics applied to strategy questions is useful in the business-to-business world. It's useful in the consumer markets. We need to show that it's just as relevant whether you're selling products or whether you're selling services. You need to show that it's relevant if we're in the online world or if we're in the physical world. So for the examples I've chosen for the course, I've tried to cover that range of contexts too. The next thing to think about is whether the examples you're using are whole business examples or really focused on key functions. I've said a little bit about that already in the earlier slides. And a very big issue indeed is whether you have enough information about the case to be able to put together certainly the basics of a model from which people can learn. And it'll turn out that you can use plausible data as well. You don't have to have all of the information, but certainly enough to get started on. I'll say a little bit more about that towards the end. So you can, of course, use the examples that I use in the online course, but if your preference is to use your own examples, then have some of these issues in mind when you're considering what exactly to choose in the way of an example. So let me just say a word about the range of context that we actually cover in the course, and in this slide and some others that follow up. The bold text here refers to cases where we've got quite substantial models that run through several classes in the course, and the not bold text either has no models at all. We simply mention important issues that arise in those cases, or we just have small models, and I'll give an example of those. So in the course, that IT support company is a business-to-business enterprise. So we're offering something that is relevant to people who are in the business-to-business world by talking about that example. We are also talking about a business-to-business example in the case of a plastics processing company, and I'll actually explain that particular example a little bit more in a moment. We're certainly dealing with consumer examples. Yes, we carry Ryanair airline through several of the classes in the course, and another one is a quite detailed model of an individual restaurant. Again, it's a lovely simple context, and it's simple enough that people can get their head around, but there's quite a lot of other consumer examples. We talk about an over-the-counter drug. It's actually a painkiller. We talk about Coca-Cola. We talk about customer growth and churn at Facebook. Consumer durables like tablets or washing machines or whatever are somewhat different than consumables, so that's a difference worth bringing out, and we talk about that. We talk about bank lending because that's a consumer service that gets offered, and we talk about some of the challenges about a call centre in an insurance or a bank support function. On the product service distinction, well, plastics processing is a product. Car manufacturer, we refer to the over-the-counter drug as a product. Coca-Cola, consumer durables. We also talk about an electrical equipment manufacturer. That again is a physical product. On services, well, an airline and restaurant, IT support, they are all services, and we have extensive models through the course on those examples. But Facebook is a service, a law firm is a service, bank lending is a service as well. So just consider when you're choosing examples to fit in your teaching needs, are you covering the range of context that you would like people to appreciate? If you're giving a class really for a service company, for example, or for people from a service background, then maybe it's not so important to include product-based examples. If you're talking to business-to-business manufacturing executives in a course, then maybe the consumer examples are not so relevant. So let's have a look at that plastics processing example, and I'll go into this to give you a sense of how we kind of build it up from the basics. So the first thing we do is we explain what the case example is, and this particular company makes plastic containers for I just got a message there saying that I was not connected and nobody could see me, but I hope people can see me.
It's trying to reconnect.
Okay.
It just dipped out and then has come back.
Okay. It looks like it's back again. So this company makes plastic containers for food in a fast-growing economy. It's actually Turkey. This is a real case example. They make plastic containers for cheese and meat and that kind of thing. They sell to a number of food processors. This is a business-to-business example, and their customers are not consumers. They're not stores. They sell to food processing companies. We've got information on what their sales are, and we know that consumer sales is driving demand for this company's products. We provide some information about their production operations and the capacity of those machines. We tell them about how many staff there are, and then we talk about the performance and the plan. And this company's moved from losses to profits and plans to add machines and staff to serve increasing demand. If you want to find out more about this, if you're a registered academic, this example is developed in full in the course. So we start from the income statement. We point out that this company's operating profit comes from its gross profit minus operating costs. We show that the gross profit comes from revenue minus the cost of goods, and the revenue comes from the units sold multiplied by unit price. So this is kind of step 2 in what we do with strategy dynamics, which is to lay out in a causal manner rather than these kind of spreadsheet-like tables what depends on what. Staff total costs are made up of staff, fixed costs, and depreciation. Where we get to after doing a bit more work on this is we get to these stocks of things on the left, these resources of customers. That's 35 customers buying on average 900,000 units per month from the company. We've got a certain number of staff costing us a certain amount. We've got a certain number of machines costing us a certain amount. One thing you can do in class or in a workshop with executives that I can't do with an online course is that you can actually get them to do the work for you. I have to lay this out in a kind of transmit mode when I'm teaching this in online setting, but you can actually go to the whiteboard and help and get the students to help you figure out what causes what and build up this causal structure on the board with them. Alternatively, you can send them away into breakout groups and make them do the work again. I see somebody is telling us they've not got sound.
Angela, I'm dealing with her.
Okay, hopefully...
I'm trying to talk to Angela.
Okay, hopefully Angela's getting some assistance here. So we'll press on. Of course, if we are recording this, we will try to make the recording available if all the technology works out okay, and that'll be available for you afterwards. We haven't got time today to go through how we get from the previous slide to this one, but this is a performance over time version of the same thing. On the right hand side, we're showing how the operating profit has built up over 24 months and how we would like it to build up over the next 36 months. So we want to grow profits to nearly €500,000 per month. And on the left hand side, we're showing what has to happen to the number of customers and the sales per customer at the top left there, and how many staff we'll need and how many machines we'll need in order for that to happen. Now, this is an example of that is developed into a full company model as we go from class to class. So we start with a very basic model, and then we add bits and add bits and add bits until we end up with a complete model towards the end. And this is not just a diagram, it is a working model, and the model is provided with this class. If we have time towards the end, I may come back and actually demonstrate the model to you, but in case I don't, you can just go and see it yourself. It's at strategydynamics.com/M201. So if you just take a note of that link, that will take you to the model. All you need for this is a latest version browser. So Internet Explorer 9, not Internet Explorer 8, for example. It won't work in IE8. You don't need to install anything or anything of that kind. It should just run. So you should see what this kind of thing looks like. So I also mentioned that there's this distinction between whole business cases, and that plastics processing company is a whole business. The airline example, the restaurant example, the IT support company, those are all whole business examples. But we cover key functions as well. So under the kind of broad marketing and sales heading, the airline brings out marketing and sales issues, the restaurant does, the plastics processing company does. But there are other examples too. Facebook very much is about the customer acquisition and retention issue. The over-the-counter drug and Coca-Cola are wholly about the marketing and sales challenges. The consumer durable example we talk about is mostly about marketing and sales. So there's also a kind of cost reduction issue going on in that particular case. And the electrical equipment case is all about marketing and sales too. There are small working models for Facebook and for the consumer durable and the electrical equipment case, but not for the over-the-counter drug or Coca-Cola. So very small examples. I'll actually show you one of those in a moment. If your concern is about human resources, or you've got people with HR interests in your class, then HR issues come up in the restaurant case and in the IT support case. The law firm case is a small working model that is focused on HR issues. There's a case example about a call centre which has HR issues, and the electrical equipment case also happens to focus on HR issues, which is, hello, someone's telling me they just lost contact again.
It seems to be working on here.
Okay, I hope that that's an individual issue there. Maybe their internet connection has just gone down or paused for a moment. So the electrical equipment manufacturer, this is a sales challenge for a big international company called Schneider Electric, who sell electrical equipment all over the world. And the example concerns a sales force trying to sell their products into manufacturers in China. So as I say, it is both a marketing and sales issue, how do we grow our sales, and it's an HR issue, how do we grow the sales team to achieve that. There are operations and distribution examples as well, obviously in the plastics processing case, the IT support case. But we talk about a power distribution company and the operations challenge that they face to make sure that their equipment is reliable. We talk about the need for a car manufacturer to build and sustain its distributor network. And the bank lending case is actually, we actually use it to talk about why things went wrong with the subprime lending, the subprime mortgage problem that really caused such trouble back in 2008. That's an operations related case. And there are other examples that bring out product development issues, information service issues, finance and accounting issues. So what this means is that you don't need to restrict yourself to making contributions to strategy classes. You can have something to say about marketing classes or HR classes or operations classes as well. Once again, choose your own examples to cover those functions if that's what you would like to do. So let me just show you the Facebook situation, and this is an example of a desperately simple little mechanism, and the mechanism is all about the word of mouth feedback that drives growth in Facebook. And this is one of the later slides. We don't throw this slide at people the first time we talk about Facebook in the course, but you can take a look at that yourself in the course and see how we got there. But it really revolves around that stock of Facebook users in the middle there, and that number of 515 million Facebook active users at some point, I think that's about mid-2012. That's real data. The whole of the chart there is real data up to that point in time. And the red line shows a desirable future for Facebook, going up to 1.5 billion users by 2015, and the blue line in later years shows a not so attractive future. And all the structure down below is kind of figuring out what the word of mouth relationship might be that would have caused Facebook to grow to that number by today, and what could go wrong with that. if things go wrong going out into the future. So it might be possible, if Facebook really messed up badly, for fewer new users to join on the basis of other people's recommendations. This has happened before. Netflix, the movie rental and download business, managed to cause a huge increase in negative word of mouth amongst its users by some rather unfortunate pricing decisions that it made, I think, about 2 years ago. This is a real mechanism that does actually happen in the real world. So, and it could happen to Facebook. They could make a mistake and cause that to happen. There could be various other reasons why fewer new users join. So, for example, they might be worried about security of their personal data or something of that kind. And if those two things happen, and on the right-hand side we've got continuing churn happening with a proportion of Facebook users unsubscribing or at least going dormant and not using the service each month, then that combination of factors would cause that downturn actually to happen. And it has happened before. This essentially is what killed Facebook's competitor MySpace early on in Facebook's growth many years ago, well, relatively many years ago, when Facebook was just getting going. MySpace was a pretty viable competitor at first, but then they managed to cause this thing to happen, and they just went into decline and failed. So this is an example, of course, of reinforcing feedback there. We've got reinforcing growth driving that growth in new users into Facebook, and we've got reinforcing growth causing that later decline if we get existing users recommending that others not join them. Actually, that's not strictly true. So that's not a reinforcing mechanism. That would be something happening on the right-hand side. With people leaving Facebook and advising other people to do the same. But as I say, that's reinforcing feedback. Once again, I think this brings out the point that this is a very well understood situation that many people will be familiar with, and it's a kind of example that's quite engaging because it's so familiar. I've actually got Gary asking if we've got a public link to this one, and the answer is yes. The model is actually at strategydynamics.com/M4A02. So if you take a note of that link, you'll be able to go and see that model and play with it and see what it'll do. It doesn't do very much, but that not very much is precisely what it is intended to do. It just makes a rather simple point in a rather powerful way in a context that'll be familiar to quite a lot of people. Now, this tricky issue about information. I've got examples and cases from two broad sources. There are public cases. The airline Ryanair is a public case. Facebook is a public case, and it's public in two different senses. There are both written business school case studies, and there's an awful lot in the public domain in the press all the time about these companies. And of course, being publicly quoted companies, they have to submit financial statements and other statements about their business from time to time. So both of those things make them public, the business school case and the fact that they're public companies. And the huge advantage of airlines is that nearly all the data is available, at least for just a few of the airlines. It's in there, in the data that they submit to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So that's where I've got all that data from for Ryanair from. It's pretty much all there. I don't honestly know how much there is available on Facebook. I was really only concerned with that subscriber growth and churn issue. So public cases is a source, and that is good if you can get that amount of information. But my other source of cases is from consulting work I've done or casework that students on my classes have done. The IT support company, for example, is a real case from a student of mine from some years back. It's a real company in Scotland and the United Kingdom. It's got real data. I've obviously had to disguise the data. That's not actual client data in that model, because I'd find myself in court if I started telling people the big wide world about people's private secrets. But that particular case is from a consulting situation. And I think I mentioned on Monday that I've got a group of faculty at Chico University in California who are quite keen on this stuff, and they use a lot of cases drawn from businesses in their region. They go out to businesses in that part of California. There's a brewing company there. There are various farming companies in the region, and they do. The students go out and they do assignments for those real world businesses, and they bring them back to class. And those kinds of cases are perfectly amenable to being turned into cases for your classes too. The advantage of consulting cases, of course, is that if you're in there enough, you can get access to all the information you need. And by the way, of course, if you're inside a company and you're wanting to train your colleagues in strategy dynamics, then of course you can use your own business and go and find the information you need. One word of caution though is that we always find that companies do not have critical pieces of information. One of the things that system dynamics and strategy dynamics actually does for people is it points out to them things they just don't know and really need to know. Even for Coca-Cola, this may seem shocking, that Coca-Cola did not track either the gross or the net rate at which consumers were being won to their products and lost to their products, and where they were coming from and going to. It knew how many customers there were. It knows everything about their consumption rates and all that kind of thing. The over-the-counter drug company did not know how many people were starting to use their headache product, and how many consumers were ceasing the use of their headache product each month. But that information became obviously important as a result of actually doing the work for them. So whilst consulting cases will give you a lot of information, you may well still find that there are bits and pieces missing. What do you do about missing data? Well, for instructional purposes, you've got a bit of an advantage here if you're teaching rather than consulting. It's perfectly okay to use plausible data. I don't actually know the number of repeat customers who use Ryanair airline or their average journey frequency with the airline. The company itself will know, of course, but I can estimate plausible information from plausible data from other information I've got, and the company has actually said that the average customer flies with them 4 or 5 times a year. So from that I can back calculate what the customer base must be. So throughout the course and the examples I use, there's quite a lot of plausible data being used to make the point, and it doesn't matter for teaching purposes if that data is exactly right or not. So in terms of sources you might use, well, business school case studies. There are thousands of business school case studies. I subscribe to a service that tells me about all the new strategy cases that get published, and every month I get dozens and dozens of new business school cases. To be frank, most of them are of little use for any purpose, let alone building strategy dynamics models with. They don't include any data or real information at all. But there are very, very good ones indeed as well. So there's a very recent case study on the Ryanair company published by Dublin University Business School. Excellent case. But because the strategy teachers have not traditionally come from a background where they think in terms of time-based data, very often that time-based data just isn't there. Missing items, you can sometimes find that missing data, which is what I've done with Ryanair, but it's not typically in those business school cases. As I say, some public companies report time-based data, and you may be able to estimate other items. So you really need to think, if you're going to pick an example or pick a case, is it likely that you or students will actually be able to find the information that you or they need to do the work for the class? So there we are. That's a range of those are the criteria that I use for choosing examples to teach with. And as I say, I've got working models of quite a lot of the examples in the course. And I can share the list of those models with you, whether you're taking the course or not, if anyone would like to contact us for that. So I guess we're into discussion time, really, and feel free to post any comments or questions that you've got on the chat. So, for example, what examples or cases do you use? What examples or cases are you thinking that you might use or want to use? If you've used cases already, what difficulties have you experienced, and what have you found works well if you're already teaching in this kind of way? So I'll just stop yakking right now and wait and see if we've got comments or questions from anybody on any of those issues or anything else.
Jean makes a point that he sent me a link for an article that looks at the difference between modelling and spreadsheets. Yeah, another approach that helps compare alternative futures.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions or comments coming in. I see that Jean has sent a comment to Christine about something. Sorry, I can't actually see that.
Basically, scenario planning and strategy dynamics.
Right. Okay. So Jean is making the point that this way of teaching is actually very helpful in communicating the idea of scenario planning, which is of course right. The bank example, the manufacturing example, by the way, I think I mentioned this on Monday. It was actually done for a bank who was being asked to lend money to that company. And the purpose of it was precisely to allow both the bank and the company itself to do scenario planning. And what if their new competitors enter their marketplace? What if there's a big change in the exchange rate between the euro and the Turkish lira? All that kind of stuff. So that's a good point. It's definitely a valuable contribution to scenario exploration. So I have got a question here from Jose, looking for some technology development management examples. There is an illustrative example in the course and I really use it to show the principles. It's a combination of two principles. The first is a classic system dynamics mechanism, which is the diffusion process, where a new technology product rolls out into a marketplace. So we might think about 3D TVs in this context right now. If somebody has got a 3D TV model that they're trying to market, how does that product penetrate the market and get uptake? But the other issue it introduces is a classic strategy mechanism known as the experience curve. And the way that works is that every time a company doubles the amount of a product it has ever produced, its unit production costs fall by a characteristic percentage. You can find it in all kinds of industries, from aircraft manufacturer to hard disk drives to solar cells. If you look it up on Wikipedia, the experience curve, and the experience curve allows you to drive your cost down, and that means that you can choose to bring your price down, and that accelerates the diffusion of the technology product out into the marketplace. That may not be exactly what Jose was meaning. Maybe he was looking at the issue of the technology development itself. The system dynamics of the technology development process is quite complicated because you're dealing with some very intangible factors. I haven't got a specific example of that in any detail in the course. We make quite a few references to the issue, but we don't actually go into it very much. But if Jose would like to contact me afterwards, we can explore in some more detail. Okay. Right. He just amplified this by saying it could refer to a software development team. Well, it turns out that one of the examples in the course actually is about the development of a software product for internal use in a company. This is not a public software product. And the issue it is looking at is the increasing functionality that is developed as the software development teams work on the software. What typically happens is that they work on getting a core set of functions into the software, and when that core set of functions is adequate, that's when the software is first released for the users in the business to start using it. This might be a piece of software for customer support purposes or something of that kind. And thereafter, the software development team continues to add functionality and releases that functionality in different stages of software release. There's a related issue to this, though, which is that whenever you release a piece of software, it comes with bugs, and some of that software development team then have to spend time working on getting those bugs out of the software. So that one is certainly in the course. I can tell Jose, anyone else particularly interested in that, a bit more about that offline. Gary is telling us he finds that using functional area examples in an interactive cross-sector group session works well. Yes, right. Because all the participants can relate to the function. Okay. So even if they aren't familiar with the details of the sectors we're talking about, they're familiar with the issue because they are all marketing people. I can tell a little tale about that. I was working on explaining to people about something called the customer choice pipeline, which features in class 6 of the course. And to get there, we need to know about the rate at which consumers cease to use a product. So we've got consumers starting to use a product, and we've got consumers stopping using a product. And I asked this particular audience what they thought the typical customer churn rate might be for a beer product. And Some people put their hands up and said, oh, could be 20, 25%. And some said, oh no, 10, 15%. And one person put their hand up and said, actually about 4%. I said, well, what kind of product have you got in mind for that? And he said, well, I work for Guinness. And we figured out that the customer churn rate for Guinness is more or less the same as the mortality rate. People stop drinking Guinness when they die, but not for any other reason. So that's an example. Sorry, that's a slightly light-hearted example to illustrate Gary's point that because I had a lot of marketing people in the audience, they could all relate to that issue of the customer pipeline in consumer products and the customer churn rate in those products. Shelley is saying using portions of a text and identify to exuberance to develop a model of the stock crash of 1929. Students need to identify the variables and possible relationships, then run it as a game. Oh, that's a great example. I'm tempted to ask whether any of your students actually went through that work before 2008. Maybe if more of them had been through that before 2008, then the crash of 2008 wouldn't have happened. So yeah, that's a good idea. Right. So I get the point that Shelley's making here, that by taking text sources, you can develop an architectural situation and a working model simply from the text, not actually relying on a written up case example. Yeah, that's a great example, Shelley. So thanks for that. I hope that's what you meant. Has anyone got? I think we've helped Jose there. Has anyone got any other example to talk about, or examples they would, or maybe class situations for which you would like an example and you haven't got one? Maybe we could help you with that. Risk related to business continuity. Viewer 28, I think I'm going to need just a little bit more information on what you're thinking about there. Well, whilst you're just getting your head around, whilst you're just to make scenario to protect the company, right? Well, that's kind of what we're doing with the plastics processing company. Clearly the bank wants to know that this company is safe and secure. So we run scenarios through about what could happen if certain things happen to the company's revenue and its profits. Would they be able to continue to repay the loan? There's an important point though about a system's understanding of how a business works that I think it rather more highlights the discontinuity issue of risk. There is the kind of risk I just talked about, where market conditions get difficult and you can't quite grow as fast as you'd like, and maybe you've got to cut prices and your profits start to be less than you anticipated. But there's a kind of when I was somewhat younger, something called catastrophe theory used to be very much a flavour of the month, and you can create catastrophes in businesses by running them into a situation where they trigger their own collapse, and that's exactly what's happened with that IT support company example that we've looked at both on Monday and today. And the point about this is that by building that model, you can see before it happens when the lines are going to cross. You can see when growth in demand is going to hit and start to exceed the capacity of the business to either supply that demand or to service the customer base. So it's a very powerful way of looking forward, and I think that would be a pretty useful thing to put into into a class, into a strategy class. Christine's just reminded me we've got another example of this with a great CEO. Okay, with a great student we've had who's continued to stay in touch with us for a number of years now, a guy called Warren Farr, who runs a mid-sized air conditioning and heating equipment company in Ohio. And Warren's work basically built a model of how that marketplace that he was competing in was developing over quite a long period of time. And the market showed some sign of downturn, and everyone said, "Oh well, this is just the regular downturn in the building cycle, and the market will bounce back up again, and everything will be back to where it was." Warren was a little bit more sceptical about that, and thought that there was actually a market saturation, an installed base saturation issue. Basically, all the housing in the region he served had been fitted out with air conditioning, so the rate of sale was no longer made up of new installation plus replacement. It was going to fall back to a replacement only marketplace. He spotted that. That was a scenario that emerged from the case that he did, and that is a written up case actually, which Warren Farr teaches with a former colleague of mine, Scott Rockhart, at Duke University. I think we can probably get people information on that case if they would like. As I say, I know it is a public case study. Jim is telling us he developed a case to teach at Darden concerning receivables management pipeline for emergency medical transport. Okay, objectives was to reduce days revenue outstanding, full-blown learning environment work well. Oh, fantastic! Yeah, this is a nice example of an operational management case. We call this course strategy dynamics, but really it's just strategy and management dynamics. And that case then at concerning receivables management. I guess what's happening here, Jim, is that we've got a company providing emergency medical transport, and then they deliver the patient to wherever they've got to go, and send the bill in to whoever they send the bill to, and then those people don't pay on time for the emergency transport that they asked for. And it sounds like Jim's got a full-blown learning environment on that. Fantastic. That's really, really good. Excellent. Gary's offering a comment now. I found a semi-counterintuitive way of accelerating student capability, especially in the early stages. Talk them through a model based on a written case study, get them to talk each other through the same model, so the same case study, get them to develop the same model off the same written case study, introduce a new similar written case study and get them to model that to each other through. Excellent. Right. Well, we'll talk about one aspect of this on Friday, which is how you give students assignments and assess their learning. And Gary's introducing a very important point about learning in this little protocol he's outlined here on the chat, and that is the ability you need to help students and give them practice at transferring learning from one situation to another situation. And that looks like exactly what Gary's doing here. Get the students to really beat their head against one case study and then throw them at another case study and ask them to model that. I go one stage further, and I'll talk about this a bit more on Friday, and actually ask them to come up with cases of their own that illustrate the same point that we've just been looking at with a particular class case that we've used in class. So thanks for that, Gary. I'm getting a sense that time is running on. We've still got a lot of folk actually in the webinar, so I'm certainly happy to carry on with discussions and answer questions. Shelley's reporting a similar experience. Final project in the class was to take a situation they were in and just develop the causal loops. Yeah, I suppose I should come clean at this point and mention that I don't really do causal loops in the way I teach strategy and the application of system dynamics to strategy. I discover the causal loops. Sorry, I help the students or participants discover the causal loops by figuring out the causal logic of what's going on, but we don't build models without data. I know other people do, and I know they find that useful and valuable, but that's a rather important feature of this particular way in which we explain about dynamics. Any other questions or comments at this point? I'll give it just a few more seconds, and if there's nothing else, I'll sign off.